Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. Let me start by saying that this act of revenge wasn't directly my doing. Well, not entirely. It all went down in the late 2010s when I was a senior in high school, and it revolved around the type of school I attended. You see, in many rural farming communities, it's common to have what we called agricultural high schools. While we studied the standard academic subjects needed for college admission, we also took specialized courses in farming technology and received credits for working on local farms as part of our curriculum. The area where I lived was surrounded by numerous large-scale cotton farms, so throughout the school year, we'd spend time in the fields, tilling, planting, and harvesting the crops. One of the farms near our school was a massive 1,000-acre property owned by an out-of-state landlord, Jake Henderson. Like the others, this farm primarily grew cotton, sometimes rotating with soybeans or silage crops. The farm had a long-standing partnership with our school, providing hands-on experience for students like myself in exchange for our labor. Imagine my surprise when Robert Wilkins, the farmer leasing Henderson's land, instructed some of us to operate the sprayers and douse the entire field with herbicides, while others, including myself, were ordered to take tractors and discs to plow everything under, leaving nothing but bare dirt. We were stunned, to say the least, but after a brief discussion, we reluctantly followed his orders. It took us the better part of a weekend to complete the task, and when we were done, the field lay barren yet pristine. Wilkins personally thanked each of us and paid us a generous $500 each, a tidy sum for a high school senior back then. Upon returning to school, we informed our principal that the contract was fulfilled, and he disclosed that Wilkins would no longer be working with the school. We would be reassigned to another nearby farm for the remainder of the year. It was a couple of months later that rumors began circulating about the reasoning behind Wilkins's drastic actions. Granted, these were just whispers, but considering the aftermath for the farmer, I suspect there was some truth to them. Apparently, Henderson had decided not to renew Wilkins's lease on the land, with the non-renewal date falling just weeks before the upcoming harvest season. Given that the average cotton farm earns around $1,500 per acre, a 1,000-acre farm could easily net the landowner $1.5 million, with about $500,000 of that being pure profit. I don't know the specifics of Wilkins's lease agreement, but it's reasonable to assume it wasn't anywhere close to that figure, so this landowner had devised a clever trick. Let the farmer get a good crop planted, then refuse to renew the lease. The farmer would vacate the premises, leaving the plants in the field, and the landowner could simply hire contractors to harvest the crop, pocketing the profits. However, since Wilkins' lease hadn't yet expired, he decided to prevent Henderson from cashing in on their hard work. His act of revenge against the landowner was to deny them the opportunity to profit from the farm's labor. Sure, it meant destroying his own farm and selling off most of his assets to purchase a new property for himself, but he had made his point. As expected, Henderson tried to sue Wilkins, but the court ruled in the farmer's favor. Since Wilkins was still under the lease when he had the land tilled, it was considered his property to do with as he pleased, and the landowner had no legal recourse to dictate how the farmer managed his leased land. From that experience, I learned a valuable lesson that went beyond farming knowledge. It taught me to never ever cross someone who has nothing left to lose. The next one is an entitled people story. I've lived in my house for over 15 years and never had any issues with my neighbors. That all changed when the people next door moved out and their house got sold to a young couple. I didn't mind new neighbors. In fact, I looked forward to meeting them. I walked over on the first day and introduced myself, letting them know if they needed any help moving in, I would be glad to lend a hand. The husband, whose name I later learned was John, gave me a strange look. He didn't say much other than a brief, "We're good," before going back inside. I brushed it off, figuring he was just busy unpacking. Over the next few weeks, I tried being friendly whenever I saw them outside. John always had the same cold response, while his wife, Katie, at least attempted to smile and exchange quick pleasantries. It didn't take long for problems to start arising. Only a couple months after moving in, I began finding my driveway blocked when getting home from work. John would park his big SUV directly behind my car, making it impossible for me to pull in. The first couple times, I knocked on their door and asked politely for him to move it so I could park. He begrudgingly got up and moved his car without a word, but the situation only escalated from there. Soon it became a daily occurrence, with John deliberately blocking my driveway every evening when he knew I would be getting home. If I knocked to ask him to move, he would take his sweet time, sometimes making me wait upwards of 30 minutes before finally coming out. I did my best to remain calm and not cause trouble with my new neighbors. One night after a long shift, I arrived home to find my driveway blocked yet again. This time, both John's SUV and Katie's sedan were parked bumper to bumper, completely blocking access. I took a deep breath and walked to their front door, ringing the bell. After waiting almost 10 minutes, John finally answered with an annoyed look on his face. "You're blocking my driveway again. I just got home from work. Could you please move your cars?" I asked, trying to stay polite. "It's a free country. I'll park where I want," John snapped back. This was the last straw. I told John if he didn't move his cars immediately, I would be forced to call the police and report him. He stepped outside and got right up in my face. "Go ahead and call the cops. We'll tell them you've been harassing us since we moved in," he shouted aggressively. At this point, I decided it was best to just go inside my house and call the non-emergency police number. I informed them my new neighbor kept blocking my driveway and refused to move his vehicles. The officer on the phone said they would send someone by to assess the situation. Within 10 minutes, a patrol car pulled up and 2 officers approached John about his vehicles blocking my driveway. I watched nervously from my window as John turned on the charm, acting friendly and cooperative suddenly. The cops didn't force him to move the cars, but I hoped just their presence would deter him in the future. I was wrong. The very next evening, I arrived home to the same scene yet again. Having had enough, I called a lawyer first thing the next morning to find out my options. He informed me that repeatedly blocking a driveway was illegal and I could take legal action to prevent it from continuing. The lawyer helped me file an official order with the city directed at my neighbors, requiring them to stop obstructing my driveway. A week later, an officer arrived at my door to serve John and Katie with the legal notice ordering them to cease blocking my driveway. I could hear the commotion next door as the officer spoke to them about the order and the potential legal consequences if they continued violating it. That very night, as I pulled into my driveway after work, it was blissfully empty. No SUV or sedan blocking access. I had a small victory celebration as I realized the legal order did its job. For the next few days, I came and went freely without issue until I arrived home one night to find John's SUV parked diagonally, jutting halfway into my driveway. I shook my head in disbelief and pulled out my phone to call the police. Within 20 minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived and asked to speak with John. As I watched through the window, I could see him claiming it was an innocent mistake. But the police made him promptly move the vehicle and warned that any further obstruction of my driveway would lead to citations and potential charges for ignoring a legal order. Ever since that night, my neighbors have begrudgingly left my driveway alone. It took some time and money, but the legal order did its job. I can finally come and go as I please without worrying about my access being blocked. It just goes to show you can fight back against unreasonable neighbors if you know your rights. The next one is a petty revenge story. A few years ago, I was going to see a few friends for a drink. We'd arranged to meet in a local pub, but some of them said they'd get there a little early to watch the football. As a few of us weren't really into football, we said we'd meet them later on. Cue later on. I got to the pub and went to get a drink. It wasn't overly busy, but there was only one bartender, so there was a bit of a delay at the bar. Found a spot at the bar and waited my turn. There were a couple of guys waiting to my right, and a bit of a gap to my left, to another group who had drinks in hand and weren't ordering. As the bartender walked in front of me, he asked who was next. I nodded vaguely to my right, and off he went to serve the other guys. A few minutes later, a girl, probably barely old enough to drink, stood next to me. You know that feeling when you instantly know someone's going to be rude? I got that feeling straight away. She stood at the bar, arm outstretched, card in hand. Not even bothering to look over to anybody else, stood at the bar. When the bartender then asked these guys who was next, she shouted across, "Yeah, 2 passion fruit martinis and a pina colada." Remember I said she didn't bother to look at any of us? Well, that was probably a good decision, as I turned to look at the other guys, and they were all staring daggers at her. The bartender took her order and began mixing the drinks. Whilst doing so, he looked over at these guys and shot a subtle wink at them. The bartender finished making the drinks and put them on the bar, out of reach of the young lady. He went to the terminal, pressed a few buttons, and said, "Okay, that'll be £186 14 pence. The girl said, "I wait, what?" Quick as a flash, the bartender replied, "There was a round going, the last order was paying the bills. Are you not with these guys?" The girl replied, "Oh no, I'm just paying for these drinks, thanks." The bartender's reply was very dry. "So, you weren't next in line then?" He then turned to the other guys stood next to me. "Who was next?" The queue resumed as intended. When the guy standing next to me got served, he pointed at me and said, "This girl's next." At no point in these exchanges did any of the orders come anywhere near the value of the round. I got my drinks. I remember it was under £5 for 2 ciders, and paid. Quietly said, "Nicely done," to the bartender as I did, to which he gave me a knowing smile. I headed back to our table and shared what had happened with my friends. Whilst doing so, some of the guys at the bar looked over to see us staring in their general direction. To my surprise, a few of them waved, with some of my friends waving back. One of my friends explained, "Oh, we were standing at the bar earlier watching the footy with those guys. They're all our team's fans too." Bartender's a fan too, he's sound. The girl was stood there for another 10 minutes waiting to pay for her drinks. She spent the time studying a menu, assumedly not wanting to look at anybody else at the bar. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I work in asset financing for motor vehicles and land mostly. How it works is, you find a nice piece of land or a nice car, but you do not have the full asset price. We buy the asset for you, and you repay us within a specific period of time, with interest, and we give you the deed to the property after you have cleared the loan with us. I am just laying the foundation here. Well, I got to work in a customer service role for the job, and a client came to request his deed, in this case, a logbook for his car, as he had cleared his loan. I checked and found that his deed was not ready, and I asked him to come back in a couple of weeks. The client did not want to hear this as he needed proof of ownership for his vehicle, and he wanted the document at that moment. I completely understood the client, though I could not do anything other than escalate the issue to the manager of the relevant department in the hopes that he would figure something out. I went to his office and gave him a brief recap of the situation, and he said I was incompetent and lazy because I could not handle the issue properly, and I have a habit of escalating unnecessary cases to him. This is coming from a guy who does not pick calls during working hours and spends most of his time on YouTube and TikTok. He also gets mad when you go to his desk for anything, especially work-related matters. He asked me to get the client and watch how easily he could solve the issue. It turns out the client was more than he could handle because the client started shouting at him as soon as I had ushered him into the office. The manager started with the nonsense that it is the government causing the delay and he needs to be patient. I was watching this and thought it could not get better. The client stood up, slapped the manager, and scattered the contents of his desk all over the floor. Other staff heard and security escorted the client out. I will never forget the looks the manager gave me after things had settled. He rarely speaks to me now and handles my escalations quickly and better. I always have a big old smile on my face when I recall this. The next one is an entitled people story. For those of you who aren't familiar with my stories, I, 31F, have a man-child entitled brother, 26M, who lives in the house I co-own with my mom. My mom has told him he has until May 31st to move out. I've been anxiously waiting for him to leave, doing my best to bide my time, but I have finally reached the end of my rope, and for something that I'm not sure is the straw or the log that broke the camel's back. Last night, while I was in bed, Entitled Bro informed me he would be taking my dog, Spot, for 3 days on some fishing trip. I told him there's no way he could do that. He said he wasn't asking, he was telling me. He said he's my dog too, and that he is entitled to take him whenever he pleases. Here's the thing though. 9 years ago, Entitled Brother demanded a dog. I begged my mom not to. He had one previously, but he neglected it, and my mom ended up rehoming it, for which he never let her hear the end of. But of course, she caved, and the same problem persisted. Entitled Bro never cared for Spot. I ended up taking over his care, paid for his vet bills, fed him, took him to get groomed, etc. Things came to a head when we had to move in with family members and they said we were not allowed to bring a dog. Entitled Bro didn't do anything to find Spot a new home. It was my problem. I found him a foster home, where I visited him every day after my college classes ended, and was able to get him back 2 years later when we finally had a place to live again. Additionally, when I moved out of my house for a year, Spot went with me. Spot sleeps with me every night and has my name on all of his records. He's now 10 and has arthritis. He takes meds for his hips and his stomach and needs frequent bathroom breaks. Oh, and he hates the water. So when little bro said he wasn't asking me, he was telling me. I knew that Spot would be miserable and possibly in pain that whole trip. He hadn't asked or even mentioned taking Spot before, so he is due for a refill on his pills tomorrow. Had I known, I would have gotten the refill sooner. I tried telling him Spot needs a lot of care, and he said, yeah, so just give me everything he needs. And I was so irritated. You wait until the night before to tell me this? Then he said something that made my blood run cold. I could have just taken him and let you panic, but I was being nice telling you ahead of time. That did it. I don't know why, but every alarm bell went off in my head. I grabbed my purse, put on my slippers, and told Spot to get in the car. I drove to my fiancé's house and slept here last night. I was going to move into fiancé's house this summer, but now I'm asking myself why the hell I'm waiting. Everyone on Reddit keeps asking me why I stay home, and right now I can't remember any of the reasons I had before. I'm done. My mom is staying out of it right now, and I'm glad because I genuinely don't care what she has to say. I know she doesn't want me to go, but I just can't take Entitled Bro's little power trips. He can do whatever he wants to the house, punching holes in the walls, kicking the appliances, calling the house a dump, but I draw the line at him taking my dog without my permission. That's my baby, and I'm not going to just stand by while he does whatever he wants with my pet when I explicitly told him no, something that he rarely hears. The next one is an entitled parent story. This was my first encounter with an EM, and it happened a few months ago. I'd gone home from college for a while since I was terribly homesick, and my parents wanted me to visit, and my mother decided to take me shopping that day. So here I was at a clothing store shopping, and after spending a while picking out things to try, I had some clothes with me, and I headed to the changing rooms. There was a bit of a queue, but I didn't mind it, and I waited patiently for my turn. Enter EM with her EK, who disregarded me and the two girls waiting in line behind me and walked past us to stand in front of one of the rooms. All of us immediately protested, and my mom loudly told her that there is a line and that she should wait with the rest of us. EM's kid looked to be about my age, I'm 19, and she ignored us while her mother said, "Oh, you can wait another 10 minutes. I have been on my feet all day." My mother hates people who cut in line with a passion, and she began to chew EM out, telling her to be a decent human being and wait in line like a normal person, but EM refused to budge. The two girls behind me began to sternly ask her to go back, but she just ignored us. The employee nearby told her that she had to wait in line or she wouldn't be allowed to try on her clothes and that it was inappropriate of her to do this. This enraged EM, who shrieked at the employee saying, "How dare you talk to me with such disrespect? You're an employee, mind your own business." The employee looked irritated, but she persisted and told her that if she didn't stand in line, she would be forcibly removed from the store. Throughout this time, EK stood behind her mother glaring at all of us. EM huffed when she realized we were all not going to take her BS and went to stand at the back of line. We thought this was the end of it, but no, EM had other plans. When it was my turn, I went in and put on one of the clothes and opened the door to come out to show it to my mom, who was talking on her phone and facing away from me. I walked a few steps forward to tap her on the shoulder to get her attention, when I see EM and EK rush past me and get into the room I had been changing in. They got in and locked the door, leaving me outside. I immediately began knocking on the door, telling her my clothes are still in there and I wasn't done, and that she had to come out. EM yelled at us to duck off, and my mother, who realized what was happening, went to find an employee. I continued knocking. I was worried because my wallet and phone were in there and I didn't want EM to steal them. All the other people in line found it incredulous that EM was being so insufferable, and only when an employee came with a security guard did EM come out. She looked furious and began to scream at me, saying, "Can't you wait a few minutes? How can you be so disrespectful? We need to use the room too." I told her that she had no right to barge into the room when my belongings were still in there. Thankfully, she didn't steal anything. But this seemed to enrage her more. EK walked off in anger, and EM screamed at me again. "Because of you, my daughter didn't get to try her clothes. You're a brat and should stay in your place." Before I could answer, she walked towards me and shoved me hard, and I lost my balance and fell. I wasn't hurt, but this was the last straw for my mom, who pushed the woman back and started yelling at her to duck off. The woman spat at my mom but missed, and then walked out of the store before anyone could stop her. It took my mom a few hours until she could calm down, but thankfully we never saw EM again. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.